abuse and exploitation. I did the exploitation part. But I was thrilled by that experience because what I found is I discovered my passion. And I had to leave, I had to really retire. I didn't want to. I wanted to continue doing this. And so I was fortunate in that there was a position opened up with the Attorney General's office in the Medicaid fraud unit. And in that unit, they of course deal many times with the elderly. So I was able to continue with the activities that I was doing with the seniors. I was able to continue with the activities that I was doing with alliances and things like that. But most importantly, I was really thrilled when the Attorney General was elected and he had campaigned on a platform of having senior issues a top priority. And bless his heart, he came through with honoring that promise. And one of the first days when he was in office, he went to his victim advocates division chief and said, "What are we going to do? I don't have a lot of background in this." And the division chief says, "Well, neither do I." And they says, "Well, let's see if there's somebody around that does." And fortunately, they were directed to me, and I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down and discuss with him what I thought would be important. And so I explained that we needed a unit of people, which we had many administrations ago, that would deal with these issues as they came up. But it went by the wayside as budget would have. And lo and behold, he came back and said, "Well, we got the same problem. We've got no money. So we can't do that. What's your next idea?" And we said, "Well, if we can't do that, then at least we can have an open line of communication for the seniors to call the office and tell us what their issues, what their concerns are, so we can address them." And so we formed the Task Force Against Senior Abuse, T.A.S.A. And we have had a phone line, a dedicated phone line up to receive phone calls. It's area code 602-542-2421. Attorney General Horn always likes to say, well, that's the legal age that people should drink, 24, but 21 is the one that actually is the law. So that's how he remembers it, and it works well. So we've been answering that phone line for a couple of years, actually a good year, and we took the first year 1,200 phone calls. And we went out and did about 1,400 presentations to civic groups and community groups. But we also said we need to have some sort of a council. So we took the people that worked in the office together and the ones that deal with senior issues, and we formed this council of, it's about 13 people within the Attorney General's office. And I went to Tom Chenal, he's the division chief, and I says, "Tom, it's great for us to sit around and talk." I says, "But we need to find out what the people are experiencing. We need to get input directly from them." And so we formed an advisory group. And these are people that are governmental, community, business leaders who deal in the area of senior services. And we have about 31 members on that senior advisory group. And it's an active group. They love to meet. We asked them right at the beginning, "How often do you want to meet?" thinking it would be quarterly. And they said, "We want to meet every month." And so we have been. We've been meeting every month. And so we've been moving along, and then about a year ago, I went to Tom and I said, "Okay, Tom, it's time that we moved on. It's time that we stepped it up. And I says, we need to have a full-time position that deals with this issue. And so he scraped around and was able to dig up enough funds to fund that position. And as of Monday, I have been in that position as the senior or the special agent / coordinator of T.A.S.A. So now I can spend my entire time working on these issues, whereas before, working with the Medicaid fraud, I could only work on federally funded programs. But now I can work on them full time. And I'm able to go out and do the things that I would like to do. But Trudy said that we're coming. Well, we're here. The tsunami that people talk about of these baby boomers, we're already here, because worldwide, every 2 seconds, somebody is turning 60. And that's worldwide. Well, within 10 years, there'll be 1 billion people in that age category. And in 2012, they estimated that there's going to be 810 million, and there's going to be 1 billion by 2050. Well, here in Arizona, people that are 85 and older, the ones that we call the oldest of the old, is the fastest growing segment of our society. If you've walked around, you've probably seen an awful lot of people that are over 60, definitely, but also that are over 85. And many of them have health problems. They all have health problems. I mean, I'm 66, and I'm going to be 67 in July. We must have been born on the same birthday, Trudy. But I've already got 2 artificial knees, and I've had surgery on both my shoulders. So, you know, these things wear out. But that doesn't mean that we're still not vital and we're still not interested in the things that go on. In Arizona, they estimated there's going to be 85 million in 2010. Well, we shot a little under that, and according to the last census, we've actually got 113,000 people in Arizona that are 85 and older. In Maricopa County alone, they were going to have an increase of 118%. And here we start getting a little kernel of information. 85% of the national assets are in the possession of people over 60 years old. So that means that these older members of our society are also the ones with most of the money. So we start asking ourselves, well, what happens when that occurs? Well, like Trudy said, it really is a hidden crime. And this lady, Marie Conley, Teresa Conley, wrote this article for the Washington Post. And I thought it was really interesting that it brings out several points here. The one that I thought was most interesting was the fact that at that time, and I don't know that it's changed, there was not a single federal employee that was tasked 100% of the time to the senior issues. There's a lot of things that occur that can explain that. But we also found that there was something else that was occurring, and you can read that. But the legislation that was occurring at that time is that the comprehensive legislation for child abuse and violence against women was enacted in 1974. In 1994, respectively. Well, the uncontroversial Elder Justice Act that was modeled after child abuse and domestic violence has pretty much languished since 2002. The law's failure to gain traction despite the support of many legislatures. So it brings us down to understand that Congress had their hands somewhat tied. She asked the question, what allows something like this to remain underneath the radar? And the fact that there's not a public identity and there's not a national census. In my experience as a police officer, I discovered that there were many things that were common, things that many times Trudy has already mentioned, that has attributed to this fact. But the Senate in 2009 finally discovered something. Amazingly enough, they discovered that in the next 30 years there is going to be 76 million people in the United States over the age of 65. Each year there's between 500,000 and 5 million seniors that are abused, neglected, or exploited. And then, most importantly, these people that are abused and exploited, they have found are 3.1% more likely to die younger than people that are not. The one that the Senate put together, it died in committee because there was not the public outcry. But in 2010, they passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Everybody knows that as Obamacare. And everybody's worried and they're all focused on the affordable care part. And they forget that there's a very important part in patient protection, the Elder Justice Act. And what it does is that it amends the Social Security Act. And we all know the Social Security Act is not going anywhere. So if they just did away with the Obamacare and everything else, the Elder Justice Act, which is part of the Social Security Act, is not going to go away, and that's there. In that, there's a section called Reporting to Law Enforcement of Crimes Occurring in Federally Funded Long-Term Care Facilities. I have given a number of presentations to long-term care facilities because it's a shock to them that this law is in effect. But any long-term care facility that receives more than $10,000 of federal funds a year is required to report suspicion of a crime that occurs in their facility. But not only they, but the caregiver, the individual caregiver at 2 o'clock in the morning that sees another worker in the facility abusing emotionally or physically a person in the facility, they are required in 2 hours to report to law enforcement that crime if it involves serious injury. If it doesn't involve serious injury, they have 24 hours to make that report to law enforcement. Law enforcement's not aware of it. They're not aware of it, and when we started making these presentations and the information available to the facilities, they started calling law enforcement. And they says, "What are you doing?" And so many of them were referred to the Attorney General's office and says, "What's going on here?" Well, we put together some guidelines for the facilities to use to help them to determine, first of all, what a reasonable suspicion is, and secondly, what a crime is. And so we put that out, and now we're moving to educating law enforcement and letting them know that nobody's dictating to them what to do. This law simply requires that the caregiver is required to report it. And then law enforcement and the facility needs to work together to come to an understanding as to how it's going to be addressed. But at least it's broken the culture of abuse that I have seen for so many years. When a caregiver in a facility wants to report a crime, but they're afraid to. About a year ago, I received a phone call in the office from a lady, and her mother was in a care facility, a very nice care facility, in fact, in North Scottsdale. And she said that she was there visiting her mother one day, and one of the caregivers pulls her to the side, off into a room by themselves, and she says, "I just wanted you to know what's going on at night when nobody's here." And I won't go into the details of that because it's really horrible. It's degrading. It's abusive. And so this woman says, well, why don't you report it? And she says, I would love to, but my husband is deployed to Iraq, and if I report it, I'm going to lose my job, and I'm the only source of income, so I can't. And so she called me up and says, what can be done? And shortly thereafter, I discovered this Affordable Care Act and patient protection. There is something that can be done, because if that caregiver does not report, they can be fined civilly up to $10,000. And if it involves serious injury, it can be $200,000. So they're under some serious obligation to report. So they've broken that culture of abuse by having that law. The unfortunate thing, though, is that it's not funded. And people are always saying, well, it's not funded, what can we do? I says, well, that's true. There's a lot of things in that are not funded, but there are things in there that don't have to be funded. For example, the reporting of the crimes to law enforcement. There doesn't require any funding for that whatsoever. So every year, the Congress refunds, I guess, the Child Protection Acts and the Violence Against Women Act, but they have not yet funded the Elder Justice Act. Well, that's fine, or well, it's not fine, it's horrible, but the fact of the matter is that there are things we can do, and that we need to focus on those things that we can do. People are constantly telling me, well, there's nothing we can do, that's just the way it is, just have to be patient. Well, there's nothing that gets my dander up more than to have somebody tell me that. And so I realized there must be something with regards to this. And I read this article by Shelley A. Taylor. She's a clinical psychiatrist, does a lot of research at the University of California in Irvine. And she told the story of her father, who's 76 years old. And she received a phone call from one of the banks. And she said that the bank called her up and says, we don't know what's going on, but your father is in here with a horrible looking person. And she says, well, that's just not possible, because my father is extremely well educated. He's been extremely cautious with his funds. He is no dummy, as people so many times will refer to people that fall victim to exploitation as they're just dummies. They're not. But there must be something going on, and so she went to work to find out. And what she identified was within the brain, right in about the center there, is an area called the anterior ansola, which is the fear center. So it's the area of the brain that people, when they see something, when things occur in their lives, or they visually see something, they process their fear. They become suspicious. And so she did some testing, and she found out that as we get older, that area of our brain starts to not function as well. And so consequently, she found out that there's something going on when people, they get older, they no longer identify things as being dangerous as being dangerous. And she did that through two ways. First of all, she did it by showing pictures of people that just look untrustworthy. And she found it was significantly higher among the older members of the study, that they found those pictures to be more trustworthy than the younger people. And so she went a little further and she hooked up the brain to the electronic sensors, and especially in that area. And lo and behold, she discovered that the brain simply is not as active in that specific area when the same things are happening, when they come across something that's very hazardous to them and very dangerous. It just simply isn't as effective. So she's doing a lot more work in that area. But that got me thinking, and it got me thinking about this. Circle of Friends is an old Mayan tradition, custom, where the members of the village would gather together at the end of the day around the fire, and very importantly, they would interlock with their arms with one another. And it's very critical that happens because there's something going on. Every society we've had on this face of this earth since time began, every society has identified something within all of us that is gone when we die, but is there when we're alive. And it's called different things in different societies, but it's still there, and as they touch one another, that feeling transmits within themselves, and they express love for each other. They express appreciation to each other. They express the desires to help one another, and it brings them together. And so I got to thinking. I thought, well, how about this? And at the Area Agency on Aging in Phoenix, at the Maricopa Elder Abuse Prevention Alliance, we came up with this little logo, this campaign. It's called the I Will. And it's a pledge. We have a website, iwillpreventelderabuse.org, and more importantly, it's now gone nationwide. It first went statewide, the campaign, when all the area agencies in the state adopted this plan, this program, the I Will Pledge. And it's very simple. It's a pledge that you will do everything you can to prevent elder abuse, that you won't violate the trust of your loved ones, that you will learn what elder abuse is, and that you will do everything you can to tell others what elder abuse is and how to report it and when to report it. And so we ask people to take the pledge. To take the pledge and to mail them in to the Area Agency on Aging. I want you to take the pledge yourself, and then I want you to go out and find somebody and have them take the pledge. And so now you've got two. And you've got two to begin your circle of friends. Two people that have taken this pledge to, number one, learn what elder abuse is, learn when to report it and where to report it, how to report it, what to report, and you're going to be with each other, and you are going to be able to identify together the things that you as a group see. Like Trudy was saying, the neighbor that they see. They're going to be able to talk together, and you'll say, well, yeah, what are we going to do? And what I'm going to tell you right now is you can call me. And I'll let you know, number one, obviously I can't take all the calls and all the reports, but I'm going to simply make sure that you are pointed in the right direction. Now the Adult Protective Services is a very good resource. I mean, that's the number one level. Call Adult Protective Services. But again, they are limited in what they can do and the reports that they can take. Your local law enforcement agency needs to be called. You need to call them. But these are all things that you all need to learn about, but you need to learn it together as a group of people. Because I have gone out time and time again and talked to people and talked to them about what elder abuse is and what exploitation is. And I can tell you that things like right now we're getting a lot of granny scams. If you don't know what a granny scam is, that's where somebody will call you up and tell you that your relative, your son, nephew, grandson, is in Mexico or some other place and he needs money. We had one gentleman call up and say that he had fallen for that. And he was a PhD. He was highly educated. And he was astounded with himself that he had fallen for it. And that's what is so important with this circle of friends. Because what it is no longer are you an individual, but you have somebody else. Because what is happening is as we grow older, we're losing our friends. Our friends are dying off. And we're finding ourselves alone. And that is what I have found in so many cases. It's a common denominator with people that are victimized by telemarketers or by the granny scams. In almost every single case, they're people that are living alone. And they simply do no longer have the friends that they can go to and say, hey, did you hear about this? What do you think? Do you think this is a good investment? And that person can say, honey, you're 75 years old. What do you think you're doing, investing all your life savings in something like an annuity that's not even going to mature for another 20 years? But see, she got caught up in the sales pitch. And she would have gone for it if she hadn't have just run it by a friend. Many times people do not have the friends any longer. And that's what we need to do, is we need to develop groups of friends that have the common goal of preventing elder abuse. Question?
I know of two very similar situations in our churches. A retiree person who is basically no longer physically able to take care of themselves, and there is no family anywhere.
Right.
They have a caregiver. The caregiver has latched on. Kind of the pervasive feeling among church leadership is they're doing it for the money. They think there's probably some, and by money I mean long-term money, inheritance type thing, the caregiver will get the funds. There's maybe what they perceive to be minimal abuse, so if you can level things like that, so a little bit, mostly verbal kind of thing. You do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it. You'll go where I tell you to go, when I tell you to go, including church. But because there's no one else, and because the individual is still within their own setting, their own home, everybody feels kind of paralyzed.
If you have your circle of friends, you've got a group of people that you have made a pledge you'll do everything to prevent elder abuse. And even if that, or let's say it's you, just for discussion's sake, and this caregiver, number one, they're going to try to isolate you. That's number one, isolate you. They're going to dominate you. But you see, you've got at least 3 or 4 other people that aren't going to allow that to happen.
But what if they don't? I mean, these two people don't, and no one's kind of willing to step up because it's okay if I step, if I interfere, and then if the caregiver leaves, what happens to individual?
Yep. It's,
so what do you do?
well,
Or is there nothing?
Well, the first thing you do is you do not become paralyzed. Because as soon as you do nothing, then you've done everything.
I agree.
And so you need to keep contact. You need to let that person know you're still there. If necessary, you can call Adult Protective Services and say, hey, I've been seeing this occur. I'm a little concerned. And they'll come out and they'll check on it. And they may see the same thing.
They should be able to get another
They will.
hired into the position.
Right.
Easier said than done.
Right. Exactly. There's a
Legally, is it legal to take the name of the caregiver for the church to have the name of the caregiver if somebody is in our church?
Church member is okay. Caregivers
Oh,
You see, we also have a big problem with exploitation, and it's called affinity fraud. And since you brought it up, I think you need to understand. Affinity fraud is where another member of your family or your church approaches you and says, hey, I got this great deal. And because they're a member of your church, you go along with it. And it's a fraud. We all know in Utah, it's a very strong Mormon community. A lot of members of the same church live in the same community. Number one state in the union for affinity fraud, because they're all being committed by fellow church members. If you want to do one for Nevada, you go to the website for Ageless Alliance. The Ageless Alliance, it's the same area. It's the University of California in Irvine. They have received the National Center Against Elder Abuse on their campus. The Ageless Alliance now has the I Will pledge online on their website. It's in the section for action kit if you want to have something. So you can go to that one, you can get one online, send it in to them, they will forward it to us. We've received pledges from Florida. We've received them from Indiana, Nevada, or not Nevada that I know of, but that I will be, and many of the other states. It's really getting there. We're part of that tsunami, and we either can be part of the problem or we can be part of the solution. And so many times I have found, and I am so encouraged by the fact that if we can just get together more often with one another. I would love to be able to hear about groups of people who have taken the pledge and they meet together once a month for lunch or breakfast or coffee or whatever. And now they have that circle of friends. And if one of the members dies off, they go out and they get another member. And they maintain that circle of friends. Right, friend?
Friend.
Thank you.